Yo, what up guys, I'm Sammy and welcome back to the Soul Drop, and today we're going to be doing a versus video between, of course, the AE2, the Adidas AE2, and the Nike Ja 3. So in terms of pricing, they're actually pretty similar. The Ja 3 retails for $125, and then the AE2 retails for $130. It kind of sucks because they, up the price for actually pretty much both of them, but for the AE2 by $10. So it's only a $5 price difference, and of course, Anthony Edwards and Ja Morant are very big superstars in the NBA, and also both of these shoes are extremely popular as well. Like last year I saw a whole bunch of AE1s and also a whole bunch of Ja 2s, but also now I feel like I see a lot of Ja 3s at the gym, like a crazy amount. But not as many AE2s. So I feel like maybe the Ja 3 is a little bit more popular, but I thought it'd be a pretty good versus video. So if you guys do want to cop either of these shoes, I try to leave in the free link in the description box. If you do choose to get either of these shoes, it does help me out if you buy it through the free link in the description box, or the YouTube link will be right over here. And as always, thank you guys so much for all the support. And also, if you guys have any questions, you can always reach out to me on Instagram, DM me there, try to get to all my DMs. But yeah, let's get it started right off with the Traction. So the traction pattern is very different, and also here in this colorway of the Ja 3 that I have, it's a solid rubber, and then for this colorway of the AE2, it's a translucent rubber pretty much. I mean, we have a little bit of solid, right, but it's pretty much a translucent rubber for the entire outsole, right? And we got like a very big herringbone traction pattern. And then we got like Ja's logo going throughout the entire outsole for the Ja 3, right? So how is the traction on a clean court? So on a clean court, they're both really nice. But if I were to nitpick, I would say the AE2 is just a tiny bit better. It has a really nice hard stop, right? The Ja 3 still has a really nice bite, however. I'm not saying it's bad or anything, but the AE2 just stops a little bit harder, right? So if you want the harder bite and you're playing on a pretty dang clean court, then the AE2 is gonna be slightly better. But again, the Ja 3 is still pretty nice, right? But also the Ja 3 had a little bit of inconsistencies for me as well. Not only on a dusty court, but also on a clean court. When I was playing on a super clean court and I did a really hard stop, sometimes I would slide out a little bit, right? It was never super dangerous or anything, but I would slide out a little bit. I'd be like, what the heck? Like, it's a clean court. Like, well, what's going on, right? For the AE2, that never happened. It was just always like a consistent bite. But for me, the Ja 3, it would slide out a tiny bit. So just be careful with that. And it only happened to me a couple of times, but I am reporting it to you guys, you know what I mean? And now moving on to the dust performance, I'd say they're both not great, right? So the AE2 definitely did pick up a good amount of dust, a lot more for me than the AE1. Like the AE2, it was affected by dust and it picked up dust quite quickly. So it's a pretty easy wipe though. And once I did wipe, I had really good stops. So if you don't mind wiping and you play on a dusty court, it's not a terrible option, but it's not the best option, right? And same thing here for the Ja 3. It does pick up a little bit of dust. I would say it's quite comparable, you know what I mean? It's like around the same in terms of like picking up dust and being affected by dust. It's just, I would say the Ja 3 is a little bit more dangerous, right? If you let a little bit too much dust build up here for the Ja 3, you do slide out a little bit more. So yeah, the AE2 is just a tiny bit better, but very comparable, right? And also in terms of squeak, I don't know if you guys just heard that, but the Ja 3 is extremely freaking squeaky and very loud. And same thing with the AE2. The AE2 has a very nice loud squeak as well, but the Ja 3 is a little bit louder, I would say. I guess if you care about that. But again, they're both really squeaky. Of course, squeak has nothing to do with performance. And as far as like durability goes, I would say they're both bad. You know what I mean? Like the Ja 3, there's a really soft part. Like it's the bottom of the logo, right? The bottom of the logo with that really thin line is really thin, so I feel like that would rip off very easily. So that doesn't seem very durable. And now for the AE2, it's really soft for the rubber and very thin for the groove. So they're both really bad for outdoor use. So yeah, they're both great and they're both solid for the traction. I wouldn't say top tier, but they're both really solid and very nice. It's just I would say the Ja 3 is a little bit more inconsistent, so that's why I like the AE2 traction just a tiny bit better, right? So there's that. Moving on to the heel to toe transition, I really like the Ja 3 more, right? So first of all, here in the heel, even though it is really caged, or you can see that like there's no foam, like midsole foam that's exposed, right? It's pretty much all like rubber, but it still allows for a nice bit of compression. And also because of the like plastic and rubber, it kind of has like a nice little bounciness to it as well, like underneath your foot, like for the entire midsole. So it's soft and it has a nice little bounce here in the heel, and also we have a nice rounded shape, right? But here in the AE2, it's just just plastic, right? So it definitely does feel pretty clunky, which kind of sucks. Not a huge fan of that. I'm sure there's a lot of people that really don't care, but for me, I like the Ja 3 a lot better, especially here in the heel. And then here in the forefoot, they're both pretty nice, but the Ja 3 is a little bit more curved, right? Like here at the tip of the toe, you can see just how much more the Ja 3 like kind of comes up, right? So I also like that a little bit better. The AE2 definitely still has a little bit more of a flatter shape, you know, and is a little bit more of a slapper. And in terms of torsional support, the AE2 is pretty dang good. The Ja 3 is also pretty dang good. And then here in the forefoot, the Ja 3 is able to flex. You know, it definitely does have like a stiffer feel though compared to like the Sabrina 3 and stuff like that, and also does have a little bit of a springy feel to it, not super springy. And then here in the AE2, same thing, right? You know, it's really stiff once you get it, but once you break it in, it does, look at that, it does get pretty dang soft and pretty easy to flex. I would say it's actually very similar to the Ja 3 as in terms of like flex here in the forefoot, and they both have a pretty like springy feel, right? So here in the forefoot pretty similar, but the Ja 3 is a lot softer and bouncier here in the heel. And moving on to the cushioning setup, so that's also another like very big difference, right? So the traction, of course, pretty similar. The AE2 is a little bit better, but in terms of cushion, for me, like, you know, when I was wearing both of these shoes at the same time, that was the biggest difference, right? So in terms of cushion, the Ja 3 is way more cushion. You know, you have worse core feel, right? The AE2 has way better core feel. You're lower to the ground here in the shoe. I mean, the AE2 is very comparable to the Sabrina 3, right? It has very good core feel. The Ja 3, it's not as good for the core feel, but it's not terrible. I would say it's around average, maybe slightly better than average, right? However, you're getting way better cushion. You're getting better underfoot feel. You're getting more comfort. And you're getting better impact protection. So it all depends on what you like. But also, like, the AE2 has pretty good impact protection as well, right? So yeah, the Ja 3 is using a Zoom X, like hybrid Zoom X midsole. And yeah, once you break it in, it's really soft. It's not super bouncy for me, you know what I mean? It's not like crazy bouncy, it's just more like a softer feel. Maybe there's like a little like subtle bounce, like slow bounce for me, but it's more just like a soft underfoot feel, right? The AE2 also is pretty soft though, right? It's using a mix of light strike and light boost. That's what it's saying, but we don't really see where the light strike is. You know, it just seems like it's boost, because if you look at the strobe board, that's what it kind of looks like. But either way, it's still soft underfoot, but then it's just like a thinner foam. You know what I mean? So the entire like boost midsole or foam that's underneath your foot is just thinner, so you just kind of, it's soft, but then it ends and it's like a little stiff. You know what I mean? So you just get a little bit of something here in the AE2, which is still comfortable, but then the Ja 3 definitely has way more of that, right? And again, impact protection, Ja 3 is way better. You have way more heel compression here as well, even though it's caged, it still compresses. But for the AE2, first of all, I'm not a huge fan of this, right? It's just plastic and it's really clunky still. But impact protection is adequate here in the AE2, but just like not super duper cushy and very soft feeling, you know what I mean? So I feel like, you know, if you want more of a cushioned, softer feel, then get the Ja 3. If you want more core feel, but you still want a nice cushioning setup with something a little bit soft underfoot still, then get the AE2. But again, like for me, it's a nice cushioning setup. I'm a guard, I like to have a responsive feel, but not a huge fan of this, right? But I like the Ja 3 as well because it has a nice cushion, it's soft, it's so pretty responsive, and core feel is still pretty good, although they had to make that kind of like sacrifice of core feel for a more well cushioned setup, right? So it all depends, it's subjective, but for me, I like the Ja 3 cushioning setup a little bit better. And then moving on to the upper. So yeah, after breaking both of these shoes in and like having both of them on foot, they both feel like pretty similar, you know what I mean? So they're not like a very thin, very minimal feeling upper, you know what I mean? But they definitely do get a little bit softer, right? So here in the AE2, you know, it definitely is pretty stiff when you first get it, but obviously you have these fangs and stuff like that. But look, it's like pretty soft now, right? And then right when you kind of flex the material or the shoe, the material kind of like gives pretty easily now, you know what I mean? So I don't really mind that as much. I would say if I was nitpicking, the Ja 3 is softer though. It is a little bit softer and also a little bit thinner where like the mesh material is exposed, but obviously not where the overlays, like these plastic overlays are. But again, it feels pretty similar in the toe box once you break it in. But I would say, of course, the Ja 3 is just softer once you, like when you first get it, right? The AE2 is, you gotta break it in. It's pretty stiff when you get it at first. For the tongue, the Ja 3 is way thicker and a lot more well cushioned. The AE2 is actually pretty minimal for the padding. It's very like thin, right? They're also both half booty construction tongues, giving you a better overall one-to-one fit. But here in the AE2, in the midfoot, the eyelets act like straps, so you get a little bit more support there. But in terms of like the actual stiffness of the upper in the midfoot area, the Ja 3 is a little bit stiffer. It feels like it's a little bit more glued down. The AE2 is actually a lot more minimal, especially with this material, right? And then here in the ankle area, let's see. I would say it's around the same. You know what I mean? The AE2 actually has like 2 Achilles pads, but they're placed very, very low. But the overall thickness, now that I'm feeling it, I would say it's pretty similar, but the AE2 feels a little bit thicker, just a tiny bit right there. The Ja 3, I would say, is around normal for the padding, you know? So yeah, in terms of how it feels pretty similar. Again, on foot, they both have a normal thickness, you know, and they both have a little bit more of a stiffer feel, comparing it to like the Sabrina 3 or something like that, but they're both very, very comfortable and supportive feeling once you break it in, right? However, the biggest difference for me is I think the tongue, you know what I mean? The Ja 3 definitely feels like really cushy and very comfortable on top of my foot, you know, while the AE2 is a lot more minimal. And in terms of quality, I would say they're both pretty nice, and also in terms of durability, they both feel pretty nice as well. You know, they both feel like they'll last a long time. It doesn't feel terrible like a really thin mesh like the Sabrina 3, Sabrina 2, you know what I mean? So there's the upper there. Moving on to the fit. So I went true to size for the AE2s, and the Ja 3, I went true to my Nike size. So all my Nike hoop shoes have been fitting pretty short for me. So I go up half a size for all my Nike hoop shoes, and that's like my true to size for Nike, right? So yeah, pretty much I went true to size and I go up half a size, but again, this is true to my Nike size for the Ja 3, and they both fit me perfectly, right? So lengthwise, again, I'm good to go. You know, I have no issues with length. However, here for the A2, it's not the length that was killing me. It wasn't short or anything. It was just like the lockdown going forward and backwards, which we'll get into. But also here in the toe box, if I were to nitpick, the Ja 3 is a little bit more snug, just a tiny bit more snug in the toe box, and also a little bit narrower. You know what I mean? It's like just a more snug fit overall, all around here in the forefoot for me in this shoe. However, the A2 is still like pretty snug everywhere. You know what I mean? Like here in the toe box, and also width-wise, it's a little bit wider for the AE2. So yeah, if you know what size you are in the AE1, go the exact same size here in the AE2. But again, they're both like very, very snug fits. And also with the material, they're not super forgiving. So they kind of like just stay pretty snug on top of your foot, right? And now moving on to the support and lockdown. So they both had a couple of issues for me, right? The AE2, again, I don't know what it is, but going forward, the lockdown just wasn't great. Like I would really crank down my laces and then I would have good lockdown. But then, you know, once you play, it kind of like loosens up a little bit. And then going forward, like my foot, especially my big toe, would hit this plastic part and it would hurt really bad, especially when I had it at first. And definitely I got used to it and it broke in a little bit, so it's not as bad, but it's still there a little bit, you know what I mean? So just be careful with that, and also be careful with the fit with that as well. So if you don't like that, maybe you don't want to experience that at all, then maybe go up half a size, you know what I mean? So I did have that issue, but also here in the Ja 3, it felt a little bit unstable. It was never terrible for me, but I just felt it in a couple of instances when I was like kind of doing heel dominant strides, and I would kind of lean a little bit of my weight on the outside of my foot, and then it would just kind of like lean or like tilt over a little bit, you know what I mean? Because there's just so much compression here. So yeah, I'm just average weight. So I feel like if you're heavier and you need like something extremely stable feeling, the Ja 3 is probably not the best option. The A2 feels way more stable. And also, I wonder which shoe is wider. Yeah, the A2 is a little bit wider here in the forefoot. Look at that. There's a little bit more width. And also here in the heel, look at this. It's way wider here in the heel for the A2s, you know what I mean? So stability, the A2 is a little bit better. Overall lockdown for the upper, I would say the Ja 3 is a little bit better because I didn't experience like my foot moving inside of the shoe at all, you know what I mean? Also, for lateral containment, they're both good. You know, my foot's not coming out of the footbed here at all. You got the lateral counters here in the forefoot and heel, so that's good. And also here in the Ja 3, you have like the plastic coming up acting as sidewall as well. So lateral containment was good for me in both of the shoes. And now moving on to the weight of the shoes. So I mean, obviously the Ja 3 is probably gonna be a little bit lighter, right? The Ja 3 is 11.7 ounces. 11.7 ounces versus 14 ounces, guys. So yeah, it's like what, 2.3 ounces lighter for the Ja 3, and the Ja 3 definitely feels a lot lighter on foot, right? It doesn't, like, in terms of like it being more minimal, because neither of these shoes are like bulky, it's just the Ja 3 feels a little bit more light. You know what I mean? And I definitely feel that on foot. But they're both very responsive though. I would even argue to say the AE2 feels a little bit more responsive because you have better core feel, and the cushion is a little bit stiffer because there's a little bit less cushion. But in terms of overall like weight, and if you want something lighter, then the Ja 3 is way lighter, you know what I mean? But in terms of like how it feels on foot, like for the overall upper, it's like pretty similar, you know what I mean? So yeah, there is the weight there. Moving on to the aesthetics. Oof. I would say I like the Ja 3 a little bit better, but the AE2 still looks really, really nice. You know what I mean? But the Ja 3 just looks so freaking good. So yeah, I'm gonna have to go with the Ja 3. Tell us what you guys think looks better down in the comment section below. In terms of ventilation, nope, they're both pretty dang bad. And as far as like durability goes, I feel like they're both pretty good. You know what I mean? They're both pretty well made, and nothing's really coming off, and nothing feels terrible, you know, in terms of like overall durability. They both feel like they'll last a good amount of time, especially the AE2. There's just so much plastic and stuff. So now wrapping things up, which shoe do I like better? I would say for me, I like the Ja 3 a tiny bit better because it just feels a little bit more fluid. You know what I mean? Especially a lot less clunky. I like the cushion a little bit better. Traction's not as good, but it's still pretty good here in the Ja 3. You know what I mean? So that's why I would say go with the Ja 3 for me. But again, if you want a little bit more court feel, you want something a little bit more stiff for the cushion, and maybe something a little bit more on the stiffer and supportive side of things. But also, again, the Ja 3 has nice support, but I guess if you want a little bit more support, then go with the AE2. Also, another thing I didn't like about the AE2, however, is this, it's just so freaking annoying. You know, it's not annoying, sorry. It's just like, it just feels like there's a wedge underneath your heel here. It just feels stiff. You know what I mean? Not a huge fan of that. That's something I just kind of like really didn't like. I wish they would have made it like less stiff, or maybe add some like something softer here in the heel. But yeah, again, it's still like not bad. They're both really good, solid performers, but I'll just pick the Ja 3 for me personally, right? So anyways, that about concludes this versus video. Again, if you guys do want to cop either of these shoes, I try to leave in the free link in the description box. But that's it. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.